What's going on, everybody, man? It's your boy Uncle P, man, and it's neighborhood conversations. You already know what we do, man. We talk to people that are in our neighborhood that we don't necessarily get a chance to talk to every day, and find out what they're doing and how they hope to improve the neighborhood. Today, I have a special guest, Mr. Mike Ewall. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Listen, man, I want to thank you for taking this time out to sit here and talk to me. Right? We're not going to talk too long, but we're definitely going to talk about what you're doing in the community. Right? Your hopes and your visions for Chester moving forward, and also backwards, because you've been in the city of Chester for quite a long time. Right? You are the what? Explain to us who you are. Who is Mike Ewall?
All right. Yeah. Basically, it's a white suburbanite who grew up on the other side of Philadelphia.
Right.
But in high school, 30 years ago, they tried to build an incinerator in my hometown,
Okay.
and that's when I got involved in 1991. And that was kicked out of my town, but they built it a few towns away. We tried to stop it. We fought all these waste contracts, stopped most of them, but they still got a big one out of Philly. And now it's the biggest air polluter in my home county, Bucks County. I now live in Philadelphia. But a few years later, I got hooked up with Zulene Mayfield, who owns the home across the street from the incinerator in Chester, which is the biggest one in the country. It's about more than twice as big as the one I was fighting. So 3,500 tons a day of trash and industrial waste comes to Chester to be burned from Philadelphia, which is now partially my trash, throughout Delaware County, from New York City, from New Jersey, from Ocean City, Maryland, and literally bits from Canada down to Puerto Rico has come to Chester to be burned. So, given that this is one of the biggest air polluters in the whole Philly region, biggest air polluter by far in Chester, biggest environmental criminal in Chester by far, by twice as bad as the other second bad company. So it's been a big priority for the environmental justice movement in Chester to be focusing on this big contributor to the asthma, cancer, and other health problems that people are experiencing. So I've been working with Sodium since '94 against this plant, against other things. They've tried to build the world's largest tire incinerator in Chester. We stopped that in 2007 and 8.
Hmm.
They've had numerous other things. The nation's largest medical waste autoclave was there in the 90s. That's now shut down. There's a sewage treatment plant a block away with a sewage sludge incinerator that wants to double in size. That's still there. That's still a real threat to face. There are just so many more things. And there have been so many victories against things that aren't even there, that would have been there if not for Zulene, for myself, for others helping out and fighting it in the past 30 years.
Yeah, because I can only imagine that an incinerator will bring other people that want to burn their things that are wasteful in their departments, right? You were just talking
Yeah.
about a sewage incinerator,
Yep.
right? So that's Delcora.
Yeah, that's still Cora. Hmm.
Wow, wow.
So right now, like half the county flushes their toilets, it goes to Chester. And now Delcora is working on making sure that other half the county shit. I don't know if we can curse on this. Maybe I
Yeah,
should.
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Go ahead.
But the other half of the county shit, when they flush the toilets, now goes to Philadelphia. That's going to build. They're building a tunnel to bring it to Chester instead. So now you're going to get twice as much human waste, and also a lot of industrial waste gets burned there too. They've been trucking it in ever since the refinery in Marcus Hook closed down, Sunoco, and they lost a lot of the toxic waste that was going from that refinery down the drain into Delcor to be burned.
Right.
Um, they started trucking it in from multiple states around. So there's a parade of like those tanker trucks that come down, I think, Booth Street to go into Delcora to burn that stuff too.
And they're carrying shit water
It can be a lot of things. It's not necessarily sewage. It can be like batches of milk from a dairy in Maryland that went
that
bad.
just went bad. Right, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Right.
some, that's one of the things I literally saw in the files when I was digging through it.
Mm-mm-mm. So the environmental right justice reform or the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, right, are the people that are supposed to be watching all these businesses to make sure they're in line with us breathing in the air, that they're throwing things up. How does that work with a lot of companies?
Well, first of all, most of the stuff is regulated at the state level.
Okay.
So there's a federal environmental protection agency, and we've got all kinds of names for them: environmental pollution agency, etc. Because they're not an aggressive enforcement agency. They are a big cheerleader for incinerators, so we've been trying to turn that around for a long time. But the state Department of Environmental Protection, they're the ones that actually give out the routine permits to enable these companies to keep polluting. And we have even more names for. We call them Department of Emissions Permitting, or Don't Expect Protection, or Department of Environmental Pollution, or one of my other favorites, Destruction of the Environment by Politicians, because these are all more accurate names for what they do. They get money when companies like Cavanta apply and say, can we keep polluting the air as a major air polluter in Chester for another 5 years? And that's currently happening. Their permit just ran out on September 2nd, but they were allowed to keep going until they get a new one, which is itself kind of weird. And they have a hearing coming up on September 22nd where people can, if they know how to use WebEx, which is not the most popular online platform, but you have to use WebEx or phone in to speak only. Can't even have video on. They have all these like restraints on public participation. So you can say, well, I don't think they should give out this permit because XYZ. And then the state's probably going to rubber stamp it anyway and say 5 more years. And so that's why we're trying to get people out for the 22nd, give some hell to the DEP. But DEP gets money for the application to have that right to pollute. And they give out that right to pollute. And then when the company violates that, which they do routinely, ever since they took over that incinerator, they've had 320 violations in the past about 16 years. That's twice as many as PQ Corporation, the chemical company that has had 160 violations in that time. So they are the worst environmental criminal in the city of Chester. And yet you have the mayor saying, May Kirkin, oh, they're a good neighbor. They're good corporate citizens, if corporations could be citizens. Thankfully, not yet. They get praise from the corporate-funded Chester Environmental Partnership, which is Reverend Strand, who goes around saying wonderful things about Cavanta all the time. So he's getting money from them to do so. So they have blinders on very deliberately because there's money crossing hands. And the state, whenever they give them a fine, and they get the most fines of any company in Chester, that money goes to the state agency that's fining them. And the little cut sometimes goes to the city of Chester too. So they're addicted to this system that says, first of all, if you check the boxes, you have to give them a permit. They can't just say, well, pollutes, therefore illegal. No, it's not illegal. It's legal. That's part of the problem. So it's very weak enforcement, very infrequent and poor monitoring, very weak standards. And the economic logic of it continues and perpetuates this notion that these companies have a right to keep polluting and keep local governments like the city of Chester addicted to money that comes with it too.
You mentioned a company just a couple of seconds ago. You said PQ Corporation. I remember if it could have been a year ago or 2 years ago where they received a fine, right? And everybody was like, all right, well, they received a fine. That means there's some money coming into the city. Like how do they calculate the money that goes to the state, right? And then the money that comes to the city that's actually being polluted?
Yeah, that was only something that started happening in recent years. If enough money comes into the state Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, from fine money in a certain year, and there's like extra to go around basically, then they'll notify the city of Chester or whatever local government it is where the polluter is and say, you can apply to get a cut of these funds. I think it's like 25%, but I have to look it up. But they can apply to get that, and then they can get some cut of those fines. But the thing is, when they have these violations, the state, it's not even public information when they say how much they could fine them. The ultimate amount of fines is public information, but we try to get this out because they get to negotiate down their fines. So imagine you get stopped for speeding, right? And the cop's like, here's your ticket, it's $120. You're like, well, I think I should pay like $20.
Right.
And the cop's like, okay. And then all the people see on the public record is $20 fine. That's what is really going on with the polluters. You don't even know that, gee, you could have been paying 120. And since when do we get to negotiate our fines with cops? But the polluters get to do that. Sometimes they get notices of violation that come with 0 fines. That actually happens most of the time.
So if you're a company and you want to pollute and not be fined, I guess, you find an area where there's a high level of pollutants already, right? Where people are already polluting and you just come through and you just pick your spot, right? So would you call Chester one of those high areas, like where they're...
Yes, Chester is one of the places that people call sacrifice zones. or also called environmental justice communities. In other words, communities that are low income, communities of color, especially more so of color, because we've looked at this. We looked at whole industries, especially the trash incinerator industry, but many others. And race is more of a factor than class. So sometimes people, especially white folks who don't want to admit racism as part of the logic here, they want to just be like, well, it's just because they're poor, right? Well, no.
Right.
There are communities like Prince George's County, Maryland, the wealthiest black county in the country, and they've got the only sewage sludge incinerator in the whole state of Maryland, just like Delcora is. They've
Wow.
got several landfills, a big cluster of power plants. They've got all kinds of stuff there. You've got communities like Lorton, Virginia, where Cavanta, same company you have in Chester burning trash, has, instead of the first largest one like they have in Chester, it's the third largest incinerator in the country, is in Lorton, and they have 3 landfills and 2 incinerators. They have a sludge incinerator there too, all concentrated around the 12th most diverse community color in the country, and they're not poor.
Mm.
It's lower income compared to the third wealthiest county in the country that they sit in, Fairfax County, but it's 70,000 average median household income. They're nice houses. It's suburban, but it's a community color, and they're surrounded by all
Mm.
kinds of stuff. And so,
Wow.
yeah, you have like low income white communities that got dumped on too. You see a lot of that in rural Pennsylvania, especially. But if you look at the on balance, this whole industry and a lot of industries, is people of color who get hit the hardest. And
Wow.
once they see a certain concentration of facilities, it's like a magnet. They're like, okay, well, that community is not going to fight us. Let's build something else there too. And you see that happening in a lot of places, including my home county. It's not as far from where, or it's not as close to where people live as you see in Chester, where it's like out your doorstep. But in Bucks County, where Pennsylvania kind of pokes into New Jersey, right where the Delaware River folds,
Mm-hmm.
you've got 4 landfills there, a trash incinerator, a huge gas-fired power plant, numerous other noxious industries. Cavanta just set up an ash plant recently. Um, a hazardous waste company tried to get in there. People finally were able to fight something off in that town. But basically, in Bucks County, you fight something off like we did in my hometown. That trash incinerator ends up in that Falls Township, where everything else is. So these areas become sacrifice zones where industry gets clustered and polluting everyone within breathing distance and drinking distance.
So along with the polluting and the sacrifice zones and the DEP, we we have children that are suffering from asthma. We have children, are the length of life that we have, right, to give is being shortened. What do you think is the reason or can be the reason why all this stopped?
Um, what do you see that stopped? You mean the things that were stopped, that the
Right.
activism that stopped the bad things that could have been here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's because Zulene led a movement, the Chester residents' concern for quality living throughout the 90s, which is reorganizing more in recent years again. And in certain interim years, I was helping folks in other formations, Chester Environmental Justice, and other names that we used, but we stopped a lot of these things. In the 90s, they shut down the biggest medical waste autoclave in the country.
Hmm.
They stopped a pet crematory from being built. They stopped 2 contaminated soil facilities from being built. One which would have burned off the gases from it, one which would have used biotech. They stopped Kimberly Clark from burning tires. They tried to
Hmm.
do that. They did that for a few weeks and had outrageously high toxic pollution coming out when they mixed that into the mix.
Wow.
Stopped a construction demolition waste transfer station. And this is just off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting some right now. There's just one thing after another that would have hit Chester. That other type of tire incinerator that we defeated in 2008 was only because I got information and organized um, folks to pull the right political levers, and put the right resistance up to
Right.
scare that company off, and it worked. So only when people fight back do you end up getting those kinds of results.
Say
Um,
that again.
Only when people fight back do you end up getting those kinds of results.
Right.
So there was a huge march. You were there back in April with us, marching down 291, took over the street. A lot
Yeah.
of folks from throughout the county, throughout the region, joining Chester residents, fighting for environmental justice, saying that the incinerator has to go, and building the movement that we've built a lot in the past year, where we have hundreds of people just a month later, well, no, a couple weeks later, May 5th, the Delaware County Solid Waste Authority held its first hearing ever, and it was an online virtual one. There were over 200 people that showed up. Only 23 even got to speak, and they never held another hearing like they promised. Eventually, maybe they'll do that again. But the county is going to hold one. They're going to hold one on the 30th of this month to hear what residents think about should we keep burning our trash from not just Chester, but the whole county and New York, Philly, everywhere else. Should that go on in Chester? Because the decision on whether Delaware County is going to keep doing that is coming up right now. It's like in progress right now about whether that relationship of steering the whole county's waste to burn in Chester is going to go past April 30th next year.
Wow. What's the other solution other than burning trash? You can put it in a landfill, correct?
Yeah, it's not like incinerator versus landfill. People like to make it seem like it's that simple.
Right.
With incinerator, you still have a landfill. So right now, the Delaware County Solid Waste Authority, they own a landfill out in Berks County, which is a little bit of a head scratcher because usually a county-owned facilities in its borders.
In the county, right.
I think historically what happened is they tried to build an ash quarry in Delaware County, and people stopped it. Right. And so they're like, well, how about we just buy this landfill in another county, in Berks County, and they did. And so they've been running this landfill. It's now called the Rolling Hills Landfill. Okay. And they filled it up. 75% of the waste that's in there is not Delaware County's trash. It's trash from other places. It's ash from other places burned in Chester, or even trash burned in Montgomery County, another Covanta incinerator, or incinerators in New Jersey are filling up Delaware County's landfill, which sits in Berks County. So that landfill is filling up as soon as April or May next year. And they're like, what are we going to do after that? Because when you burn trash, say you burn 100 tons of trash, and they're burning like 35 times that, but every day. 3,500 tons a day there. But for every 100 tons you burn, you end up with 70 tons of that trash becoming air pollution. So you're breathing that right away. Everything you throw in the trash cans, you're going to breathe it. Right. But the other 30 tons doesn't magically disappear, doesn't go away, doesn't turn into energy, into steam. Like they say, trash to steam. That's how they first tried to sell the one in my hometown when they tried to build it there. They said trash to steam, and I was in high school. I'm like, oh, I saw that in the paper. That can only be a good thing if they can turn bad things into good stuff. Why not? Well, that's never what was going on, ever. It's not just ice cubes we're throwing in trash cans and making water vapor, you know.
Right.
You know, so there's all kinds of stuff in there, and we end up breathing it. It becomes far more toxic when you do. So for every 100 tons you burn, you get 70 tons of air pollution, actually more than that, and 30 tons of highly toxic ash. That still has to go to a landfill. So it gets trucked up to Berks County and dumped in the County Solid Waste Authority's landfill, which is going to fill up soon. So they just got permission to expand it to 81 stories tall. They're going to build up the soil around it so they can go vertical and just build that even taller than it is. And that's supposed to buy them another 10 years. And so that is a publicly owned asset that's basically being squandered to take care of other people's waste and to subsidize the most polluting and expensive way to manage waste, which is burning it. A private company called Covanta is benefiting from the public subsidy of cheap ash dumping at the county's solid waste authority's landfill. So we're not cool with that either. That's a big issue. But you asked what the alternative is. So if you had to just make the decision between do we burn it and then landfill ash, or do we just go straight to the landfill without burning it first and breathing 70% of it, I would say go straight to the landfill. Right. Landfills are not good. We know that. They stink. They contaminate groundwater. They have global warming problems. All that is real. But those impacts are far worse, including the global warming problems. It's just it starts in Chester because all that carbon goes straight into your air immediately right there. And the toxicity increases, and it makes the landfill worse. It's smaller, but it's more toxic because it's got that fine ash. Mm-hmm. So if you think about, like, if you have coffee beans, right? You pour water over coffee beans, you're not going to get coffee, right? But you grind them up and increase the surface area, you pour water over, you get coffee. Right. Well, same thing with trash. Like if you take this cell phone, toss it in the landfill, it's going to take a real long time before any of the toxic metals or other things in here are something I can eat or breathe or drink, right? But if you burn this, you're putting some in the air already. You're creating new toxic chemicals that weren't already there, putting some in there, and the rest are in the ash. And it's like coffee grounds. It's got a higher surface area, so you put rainwater over that, you get coffee. And when landfill, they call it leachate. You got toxic things that are able to contaminate the groundwater that wouldn't be so easily able to do so if you just threw the thing in there straight.
So what you're saying is there's no real way to get rid of trash?
There is a way of getting rid of trash. It's just the first thing, and I'll go get to the real solutions in a second. But the first thing is to recognize, don't do the most expensive and polluting thing, which is to burn it first and then dump ash on a landfill. That's just stupid and archaic.
Right.
And it's something that we need to move beyond. But there's just so much misinformation of Cavanta and others out there waving the flag saying it's a solution to global warming and renewable energy and all these other falsehoods that it confuses a lot of people, including some fairly intelligent people who should know better. They get confused by it.
Then
So,
they
yeah.
talk. Hold on, real quick, because I don't want to miss this. Because you talked about turning trash into steam, right? And how they're not doing that. How
No,
are they not doing something that they said they could do?
sure. So if you think about steam is like water vapor. You take a shower, that's steam, right?
Right.
You boil kettle water, that's steam.
Right.
It's just water. Well, yes, there is steam coming out of the smokestack at Cavanta, but there's also nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks. There's also mercury that messes with your brain and your ability to think. There's lead that it also does that and lowers your learning ability, increases violent behavior, and all kinds of other health impacts. They're the largest source of mercury in the county. I think they're second largest in lead. They're number one in nitrogen oxides, all these chemicals, dioxins, and those toxic chemicals known cause immune system problems, birth defects, all kinds of sexual reproductive disorders, endometriosis, you name it. You name a health effect, there's probably a pollutant coming out of that smokestack that causes it. There's some exceptions. Most of them, though, especially respiratory problems, heart conditions, the particulate matter causes stroke, COPD, heart attacks. Um, Definitely, the cancer and asthma are contributed to by the pollution coming out of there. Steam is not going to do that to you. It's all the other stuff that's coming out of that smokestack that will.
Right. Okay.
All right. So, ready for real solutions?
Yes, I am. Absolutely. Real
So,
solutions.
so the real solution is not simply go straight to landfill. That's like just step zero. In moving to any sane system, you get the most insane thing off the table, and in doing so, you're going to get rid of the county contract that says you have to waste a certain amount in Delaware County or pay a penalty. Right now, there's a put or pay clause in the contract that the County Solid Waste Authority has with Cavanta. And that says that you have to supply a certain amount of tonnage to Cavanta every year. I think it's about 300,000 tons of trash a year. And if they don't, they have to pay Cavanta as if they did. Which means, yeah, you're making a face like, that's crazy. Well, and it is crazy. There are communities like Claremont, New Hampshire that had a contract like that with 29 towns that in the 90s went bankrupt. They filed for bankruptcy because of put or pay clauses in their contract with an incinerator. So sometimes it gets that extreme, and they weren't allowed to go bankrupt. The judge made them pay up. So you have this economic arrangement where you have to be wasteful. So you can't do the right thing if you're locked into a contract with an incinerator. Landfills don't have contracts like that. Incinerators often do. Landfills don't need to because they don't have to have a certain amount of waste every year to keep running. If you fill them up slower, great. They last longer. They got more space.
Right.
So that's one of the benefits of using a landfill. You can fill it up whatever speed you want, and slower is better. So if you're going to do the real solutions, though, there's this thing called the zero waste hierarchy. And a lot of folks get caught up in, oh my gosh, that's zero. We're never going to have zero waste. That's crazy talk. Well, we have a lot of crazy talk in other areas, too. We talk about zero drug tolerance, zero safety defects, zero injuries in the workplace. What CEO is out there saying our goal this year is to injure 5 workers?
Nobody.
No one says that, right? They get left out of the room, right?
Right.
And we do that with waste all the time. We say, well, we're going to reach a 35% recycling rate. We're not even half of that at this point in the region. But some places have higher goals of 60, 70, 80%, even if they're really ambitious. In this region, you're lucky if you have like a 50% goal or any goal. But that is basically saying, well, I'm for wasting the rest. And so if you're not for zero waste, how much waste are you for? Is the question, right? So zero waste is about saying we're going to keep trying. We're not going to give up.
Right.
We're not going to reach zero, but we're going to get damn close trying, right? And if you do that, you put the right policies in place.
Absolutely.
And so you have this thing called the zero waste hierarchy, which I developed that's used as an international standard now. Delaware County Council just put out a request for proposals for a new 10-year solid waste management plan that says we're going to follow that hierarchy, which is awesome. Baltimore City Council also endorsed it. Other places around the country are like, yes, zero waste is how to go. And what it basically means, you start at the top with like rethinking, redesigning things, because some things are just not designed. Like this phone is not designed very well for recycling. They can't take this apart very well. Some of it they'll manage to do, but there are a lot of things that are just not designed the right way. So that's the first step: is you just rethink. Do you need it? Rethink: is it designed right? And then you get to the 3 R's that a lot of people know, not the reading, writing, with arithmetic, but the reduce, reuse, recycle. And so we need to reduce how much we're consuming. We need to reduce the toxins that are used in making it, design things better, even before that. We need to reuse stuff. So thrift stores are part of zero waste. All kinds of free cycle, offer up, all the apps we have that we can use to be like, I don't need this anymore, but maybe someone else does. Let's put it on my
Right.
phone. And oh, gee, there's a neighbor that wants it. Great, we'll give it to them or sell it
Right.
to them. That's reuse. That's higher than recycling, because recycling, they have to collect it, which Mascaro and Chester is not doing a good job of even picking up the trash, especially not picking up the recycling and actually recycling it. In Philly, where I live, one time out of the last, I think 17 times they picked up the trash outside my house, they actually recycled and didn't put the recycling in the trash truck. So we're fighting that in Philly too, because if we don't, that's more stuff that's getting burned in Chester.
Right.
So I'm fighting the battlefront in Philly on my own side that way. And we need the recycling to happen. And recycling is worth a lot. There are a lot of jobs and a lot of value in the recycle bins. Even the plastics, people think, oh, well, China won't take our poorly sorted stuff anymore. Recycling costs too much. And that was true a couple of years ago. But right now, recycling is worth a lot of money. The top 5 things in recycle bins that are worth anything used to be aluminum is always the most valuable. Now, number 2 plastic is actually worth more than aluminum, which is shocking. The other 4 top valuable things are also plastics. So that the glass has got market problems. That's a little more difficult. But there's a place in Eddystone that's recycling that to like aggregate. Um, but the metals, the paper, all that stuff has markets, and all that produces a lot more jobs. You get 5 to 10 times as many jobs for the same amount of material recycling it than you do burning it or throwing it in a landfill. And so these are jobs we're throwing away by not recycling. And then, of course, you got composting. So the organic stuff, the food scraps and yard waste, if we actually composted that, you get about 5 times as many jobs with that, and you avoid having gassy, stinky landfills in the process. And then on the final thing, on the back end of the zero waste hierarchy, the things that people throw in the trash anyway, even after you do all the right things, you make sure people pay per bag, so there's an incentive to actually recycle more and compost more, and that's super effective. It gets people instantly to cut waste almost in half.
Right.
If they just incentivize things right. We did a pilot program in Baltimore like this, in the same communities that people in power say, oh, those communities, those people won't recycle. And we know what they mean by that. It's racist and classist coded language that we see from a lot of city governments. And yet, I think the laziness is not the people, it's the people in charge of the program who are not creating the right incentives to make sure that people have the tools they need, the bins, the education they need, the hauler that's going to actually do the right thing,
Right.
the reasoning why it's important, people's health, and then the economic incentive. You price it right, and people do the right thing. And
So we have a question here. Where they're asking who economically benefits more at the end by a zero waste initiative.
oh god, everyone. You've
Right.
got the neighborhoods that benefit from just having increased jobs. You have less air pollution because they're not going to have an incinerator in your backyard if we're doing zero waste, because incineration is forbidden in a zero waste system. So if we get where we're trying to go with the county, that incinerator will shut down. It's not going to shut down right away. It's not going to shut down just because Delaware County stops feeding it. But that's 31% of the waste going there. So if Delaware County pulls out, that's a big leg of that tripod, I guess you could say, that is knocked out from under them. And if we stop them from getting Philadelphia's trash in 2 years when that contract comes up, that's another 31%. That messes their day out pretty badly if they have almost 2/3 of their waste no longer going there. So our goal is to do all the tactics we need to starve them and to shut them down. And that's going to reduce the air pollution in Chester. It's going to create more jobs in Chester if we get the alternatives built up. It's going to help the climate as well. So it helps like everyone on the whole planet at the same time.
Right. And they were asking increased jobs where? How do you where would the jobs come from in this zero waste initiative?
Sure. So one of the things that we're doing and pushing for things the way we are at the county level right now is to try to make sure that as we build up the alternatives, that those jobs go to the place that needs them the most. And of course, Chester is a place that needs jobs really badly.
Right.
It's not like me as an outsider or anyone else is going to be like, Chester's going to have these things. If people in Chester are like, we don't want a recycling plant, we got too much stuff, that's fine. People can be like, we don't want it here. But if people are like, yeah, we'll cut you a deal, you shut down the incinerator and give us a recycling plant, thumbs up, then that can make sense. And so it's up to residents in Chester,
Right.
or to the extent that is I have any influence over the process. Part of my influence is going to be making sure that's not just up to me, but
Right.
up to residents of Chester to decide what they want.
Right.
But for the county to actually put the right offerings on the table and say, we're going to invest in this infrastructure and give Chester first crack at it, at that economic development, then you have a lot of opportunity to be built up there.
I mean, Grow Man, he's saying, Chester has the influence, right? But we have to have the influence to come together, right? Too many people pointing over here and over there, and the trickery is happening right in our face, right? So, a recycling plant is cool, but are we really recycling in our houses, right? Do we have a separate can right there to put the water bottles in, the paper, the boxes? Are we breaking down the boxes correctly? Are we making sure that all of these things are getting done, right? So, I appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me, man. I would love for you to come up here and do a show just like this right now, right? Where you're talking to the people and you're informing us of the things that need to happen and the way we need to be pushing out a zero waste initiative, and galvanize the people, right? I would like that. So we'll talk about this, a little. I told you I wouldn't keep you past a half an hour though, right?
No, that's totally fine.
And it's 1:32 and the Eagles are playing. So, but
Okay, don't want to mess with that.
right. But I definitely appreciate you, your time, your effort. You've been at this for a very long time, right? And it's time that, you tell the people what you've been doing and they ask the questions that need to be asked, right? If there's no more questions, we don't
Someone,
know.
well,
Chester
Roman
owns
says, we don't know Chester owns that incinerator. Chester does not own that incinerator. It's owned by Cavanta and operated by Cavanta. It's totally private.
right.
Chester has the power to stop it if they were creative and had any will to do so. But Mayor Kirkland, Portia West, City Council, they have been totally in bed with Cavanta and promoting them, and even writing. Kirkland wrote to Philadelphia and said, please send us your trash 2 years ago when the contract we were fighting was up. And Chester residents, and we pushed back against that. And Mayor Kirkland and Reverend Strand as well, CEP, Chester Environmental Partnership, said, give us Philadelphia's trash. Also begged for New York's trash too. So yeah, Chester could have the influence if it had the right leadership. Right now it doesn't. At least not in the government. The people, yes. The government, no, not yet.
The people, yes. The government, no. And the people are the government, man. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate this, man. I'm definitely going to hit you up a little bit later after the game's over, depending on the winner or loss, right? And we can talk about let's bring you up here on Sundays, even if it's just for a half an hour, right? To talk about environmental justice, right? Energy Justice Network, what you're doing, right? Outside of what you're doing for Chester, what you're doing wherever you are, right? Globally, because it seems like you're in a lot of different places at the same time, man.
I'm working all over the place. So yeah, let me give for those who want to check out how to get involved, because there are big things coming up in the county council on the 16th, a hearing with the state on the air permit on the 22nd, a county hearing on waste issues on the 30th. So there's a lot going on to follow just this month. So if folks want to go to chesterresidents.org or to Chester Environmental Justice on Facebook, you'll find, and just follow those, and you'll find out what's going on, how to get involved.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, man. I appreciate you. And again, like I said, I really want you to come through every Sunday around 1:00, right? And just give a spill on what's going on. We're going to talk about that. All right.
All right. All right.
Be good. Man, that was a great conversation with Mr. Mike Ewall, man. We have to continue to search out this knowledge and the facts about things, right? We can't think that we know everything. So, make sure you tune in Thursday. I will be interviewing Kearney Warren, right? She's a write-in on the ballot in November for the election for city council, a write-in, right? She's a Green Party. Why is she Green Party? Who is she? Where does she come from? Right? I think those are a lot of questions we have for her. So make sure Thursday at 1:00 you tune in, man. It's Uncle P, Neighborhood Conversations, man. You already know, man. Passion drives purpose. If you don't have a passion, how can you have a purpose, man? I want y'all to be safe. I want y'all to stay in tune, right? Ask the questions. Ask the questions of the questions. And when you answer the question, ask another question, right? It's cmpradio.net, man. It's Uncle P, the voice of Chester. We're out of here. Peace.